Hello, Jordan Chariton, live with Louis DeAngelis, Thursday, June 15th, right here in the United Corporations of America. And we've been covering one of the worst corporate poisonings, potentially in American history, I'd say, the East Palestine derailment and detonation. We're done with the control burn. No more of that.
Right.
Phony language.
I've got to say, I had it ingrained in my head, so occasionally controlled burn still slips out, but I'm doing my best.
No. But Lewis has been doing God's work out there, reported there 3 times. We're going to send him back this summer, where honestly, with all these chemicals and the weather getting hot, I believe with hot weather, you might have a lot worsening of the reactions to these chemicals that the EPA and all these entities claim are not there. But yesterday, residents went to the Capitol, the State House in Ohio, to issue their demands. We're now talking 4 months? I'm so tired because I don't sleep. Yeah, over 4 months since this happened. And essentially, instead of just getting the help they deserve, they've gotten a lot of platitudes, gaslighting, and pretend checking of the boxes. So a bunch of residents went, and let's show the video first, and then we're going to have these residents that came on. Please smash the like button, share the live stream. This is Unity Council, which is a group that's formed to organize, to issue demands, both to the state governor as well as the federal government. And they were not treated so nicely for the crime of begging for help because they've been poisoned. So let's look at, this is just part of it. They did a lot more while they were there. But let's look at, they were basically forced out of the balcony over the House floor.
Nobody's down our souls.
This impacts every person. Vinyl chloride is responsible for 99% of the plastics in this country. 5 to 6% of the plastics can be recycled. That means 95% of the plastics cannot be recycled. Nosebleeds, neurological symptoms. We're having seizures. We're having them now. Please declare an emergency declaration. That's my sign. That's my property.
Don't put your hands on her. Don't put your hands on her.
Take my property.
Do not put your hands on
If you give me
her.
my sign.
That's her property.
That's my property. May I please have my property?
Save our kids!
So let's get to it. Joining us is Ashley McCollum, who has been on quite a bunch. Jamie Wallace, also Jess. Sorry, I don't know your last name. Conrad, Kennard. Kennard. And you guys were a few of the folks there. So before getting to what obviously we just saw, which is just horrendous, tell us about kind of what you were doing there. You had a press conference, and you were obviously trying to get the governor's attention, who, from what I could tell, has just done carefully controlled visits to East Palestine, where he talks to school kids and pretends everything's moving along at a good pace, and everything will be just dandy once the soil is removed. So tell us what the objective was with yesterday's trip.
What the objective was to get Governor DeWine to sign an emergency declaration and declare an emergency in East Palestine. He has not done that yet, and if he does not do it, there are a lot of residents that can't get help, especially in Pennsylvania.
And Louis, I mean, you've covered this extensively, but I don't know. I mean, do you know why the governor hasn't issued a state of emergency? Has he ever? Because all we know is he keeps requesting extensions. He's now asked for 2 or 3 extensions for a disaster, not a state of emergency, an extension to request a disaster declaration, which we're going to have Melissa Mays on later from Flint, but I don't think it's right. But according to the law, East Palestine isn't eligible for disaster declaration because it's not a hurricane, it's not a tornado. I think it should be. So he could have declared a state of emergency. He doesn't have to do all these extensions.
Right.
But for some reason he hasn't.
The thing that stands out to me is that, to me, it seems like there is no harm in him declaring the state of emergency here. The worst case scenario is that additional resources are provided so that kind folks like who are with us right now don't need to spend their Wednesday traveling to the state capitol to be treated by the folks working in the state capitol like crap, to be honest. The fact that the declaration hasn't happened, or the state of emergency has not occurred at this point, is egregious. Again, there is no downside, to my knowledge, for the governor of Ohio, Mike DeWine, to issue this. He absolutely has to be aware of the horrendous health effects that people are still dealing with, the financial effects that people are still dealing with, all of these things that we've done our best to try to highlight some of the voices. So again, some of the folks you've seen right here, other people we've spoken with on the ground multiple times, but the governor has yet to do anything. To my knowledge, there really hasn't been much as far as legislation at all in the Ohio state legislature either.
We've been told that he wasn't doing this disaster declaration because FEMA said that East Palestine did not qualify because there was no property damage. There has been property damage. There's houses that are contaminated. And I think the problem with this particular disaster is we're dealing with something that is literally invisible. You don't see what you're breathing in the air. You don't see it in the form of, your house being demolished by a hurricane, but our property has been demolished. I heard that they're actually tearing down one of the buildings today, the Saram Fab, which is very close to the derailment site. So if we don't qualify for your typical FEMA, then make an exception.
Right.
Whatever you have to do.
Right, and even if it gets to the point where they make this declaration, okay, like let's let the bureaucracy hash itself out. If it needs to go to a court case or something to actually see it, at least there would be an effort to try to do something, because clearly what is happening right now is not working, or else we wouldn't be in the situation where, again, you all need to go and do this. People, looking at this from the outside, there's this like weird mentality of like, why are these people still trying to, get the message out on this? Like, what's going on? Like, it seems like everything's fine and dandy by now. You wouldn't be doing this if things were back to normal and it was actually safe to live in your homes. I'm sure that all three of you would much rather be staying in your home that you've lived in for however long before, and not bouncing around between hotel rooms and Airbnbs. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what you all would want if things were normal, right? But
if I could just jump in here with the emergency declaration. So after the events of yesterday, I did a lot of research as to why they would not want to declare an emergency. And one of the things that I came across is because, using federal or state funding would take away from the funding that Norfolk Southern is already providing. And so I think that they're afraid that if they declare an emergency, that it'll become the responsibility of the state and federal government to continue the remediation efforts. And I think this is really selfish. I mean, who cares who's paying for it as long as the people have what they need, right? So you have emergency declarations that have been made in other places as a result of hazardous chemical exposure. Why would East Palestine be any different? You have the vermiculite issue with the asbestos in Libby, Montana. That is the only city in the United States that was able to declare an emergency due to hazardous chemical exposure. And I think that's so important in this case as well, because they ended up being able to get Medicare for all in some circumstances. We're talking about people that are not just going to be acutely exposed, but people that are going to be exposed for a really long time. This is a long-term issue, right? They're just waiting. The CDC wants us to wait to get cancer. Well, you're going to do all your litigation now, say 4 or 5 years, get your reward, and then 20 years later, you're going to get cancer. Well, in order for us to get Medicare for all, we need that emergency declaration. It provides a lot of very crucial, vital resources that we would become able to receive at that point.
I might be a little more cynical than you, Jess, and you, not to say that you haven't done the research, but I also know that from what I've been told, and Lewis has been told, There's nary a politician in Ohio and East Palestine that's not been purchased by Norfolk Southern. And I believe that if he issued a state of emergency, they would also have to provide with that a damage assessment. And if you issue a state of emergency, then it's going to look a lot worse than Norfolk Southern wants it to look. I agree with you that the state and the federal government don't want to pay for it. But frankly, I don't even think Norfolk Southern, other than, their barbecues and providing the kids with Easter eggs, I don't think they're paying the money they should be paying. Ashley, do you think there's something to this that the governor, seems like a mild-mannered nerd, but he does take a lot of money from this railroad industry. He does take a lot of money from the very entities that they're supposedly regulating here. It doesn't make sense why you wouldn't do a state of emergency unless you're trying to soften the blow here for the railroad company in civil liability and other things.
I just had a phone call actually. With someone stating that the money that we're getting from the railroad is in fact doing our taxes next year, and a lot of people that rely on welfare or insurance through the state, they have to claim that as income or get some kind of form from the railroad allowing them to continue their assistance. Well, a person that gave me a phone call, they said that the only way that won't be considered income is if this then to talk to where our insurance is being renewed.
You might want to dip out of here and dip back in because your connection's not great. But I wanted to also ask whomever, you went to the State House. I assume the governor was aware, either directly or indirectly. Did his team speak with you when you got there? Was there any communication? Are they at least pretending to, care here? Because all we saw was them basically kicking you out. But can you tell us if there was any communication with the governor's office?
After we were done disrupting, we actually walked over to the governor's office to give him our demands. We were going to have 4 or 5 residents walk them up to his office, and they stopped us at the registration desk. They called up to DeWine's office, and they sent down 2 gentlemen who took the demands from us. So, that's how they handled it. But I do want to say that we were heard. There was at least one representative who came out, and I'll let Jess speak a little bit more to this, but I had an extensive conversation with this representative, and I was told that, last time your district's representative, Blasdale Robb, updated us, she said everything's fine. It's like these politicians are pushing this narrative that everything's okay. Norfolk Southern is buying off the residents by putting amphitheaters and aquatic centers in the park, by throwing street fairs, buying people ice cream. Like, it's overshadowing the people that are sick. It's, them paying off the town to create this narrative that everything's okay when it's not okay. The speaker did do an interview after we disrupted where he, the headline was "Residents Yell." And he's basically said, we could have sat down and talked. No, we couldn't have. I have a video, I don't know if I sent it to you, of Bill Johnson and what he said to me. Bill Johnson
is the congressman of your area?
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. We have reached out to Governor DeWine's office. We have reached out to Rowley's office, to Blasdale Robb's office, to Vance's office, to Sherrod Brown's office. And ironically, when these politicians do come into town, they meet with a carefully selected group of residents, the ones that Norfolk are paying off.
So to be clear too, so you said in that your state representative, the one who represents East Palestine or the surrounding area, in their last update to the State House about this, to the state legislature, gave the impression that everything was fine and back to normal. Right. And that's what this other representative who one of you spoke with said.
It's the same representative that gave a letter like kind of congratulatory letter to a business that threw a grand opening at Ground Zero. So if that gives you any sense of what's going on here, and how they handled the state house yesterday. Again, I'm going to let Jess, tell this story, but she can tell you how it was handled when they removed us from the congressional hearing or from the House hearing.
Yeah, so that was actually me in that video. I was holding up a sign very peacefully. I was saying my truth, which is, this is not just an issue about East Palestine. This is an issue about every person, which to me, that's what EP stands for now. And I think ultimately when I was escorted out, I did so peacefully. I know that I disrupted a meeting. I understand that. The issue came when the gentleman decided to take my personal property from me. He ripped my sign out of my hand, and in an attempt to reach forward and take the sign back, I was then grabbed by the arm, which I actually do have bruising from that incident on my arm currently. Again, I was very polite. I was asking, please, could I have my property? And I still actually never received my property. There was a reporter that ended up giving me my sign back eventually, who was able to get that information back to me. So that's me in the video. I've never done anything like that before. I wanted that to be very peaceful, and I think that was everyone's goal, was just to cause a disruption, but to be peaceful. And I think it's really unfortunate that the violence came on the side of the state when we were there. So I did speak with 3 different Ohio representatives following this incident who actually sought me out in the courtyard outside of the State House. And they explained to me how important it is for me to file a formal complaint, which I do plan on doing. And I do have 2 state representatives that are going to help me through that process. I want to make a comment quickly about the shows that are being put in town by Norfolk Southern, right? The festivals and all of that. I think it's important to recognize that people do heal in different ways. People that maybe aren't physically impacted by this, or politically not impacted by this, or financially not impacted by this, they're healing in different ways. And I think it's really important that we recognize that, Norfolk Southern is the bad guy here, right? The vinyl chloride, the plastics industry, those are the bad guys here. It's not the community people that show up to these events trying to heal, trying to move on, trying to find some sense of restoration. My sign yesterday was really because it's about every person, and that plays into the vinyl chloride, the making of vinyl chloride, which 99% of is used to make plastics. The current recycle rate of plastics is only about 5 or 6%, which leaves 95% of the plastics that we use, kids' toys, things like PVC piping and unnecessary plastic packaging. These are all things that we use that, had we, over the last 50 years since vinyl chloride was determined a human carcinogen, had we had the political willpower to shift away from using plastics, this spill might not have been so toxic. So these types of things, while this was one of the biggest ones, or the biggest one in U.S. history, this will continue to happen, and it will continue to get worse if we do not recognize that there are alternatives to plastics.
I just have one more thing to add, because Jessica and I don't agree on this, and we respect each other's opinions. That's fine. But my problem with all the events and the people attending it that are not having symptoms is they are allowing Norfolk Southern to control the narrative for the people that are sick. The media is taking these clips of these events in town and saying everybody's fine. If you say something and you speak your truth and say our family's sick, or why are they putting an amphitheater in the park when there are still people stuck in their homes, then everybody in town who is not sick, well, I won't say everybody, people that aren't in town that are sick, a handful of them will start, bashing. Why do you have to be negative? And, my other issue is with thanking Norfolk Southern. Norfolk Southern could have killed my child. Had I went into my home when they told me that it was safe, my child would be dead. So for anybody in my community to be thanking them, I just cannot get behind that. But like Jessica said, I agree to disagree. I do see that push for normalcy, but at least mention the sick people, so you're not just controlling our narrative and allowing the media to control our narrative.
I want to mention something real quick. And by the way, kudos to you, because I've been in way too many of these stories where, understandably, residents and activists just kind of, come at each other, and there's divisions, and nobody wants to work with each other. You're going to have to accept that people are going to have disagree some of the time, but still work together. Jess, you were screaming out about vinyl chloride, and that is one of the very reasonable demands you're making to the governor. I believe it's 30 years of testing, not just in East Palestine, but for residents. Recently, I know of at least 10 residents who have gotten testing for vinyl chloride in their urine and had elevated levels. So there is a case to be made that there might be residents that don't have symptoms right now, but in 5 years are going to find out they have cancer. Mm-hmm. Not most of the residents have not been tested for vinyl chloride and other things. And the fact of the matter is, I just have to be real. This is if you have elevated levels of vinyl chloride, I'm hoping and praying everybody ends up okay, but that's not a good thing. But it just seems like there's this disconnect where you have the CDC guy what was it, last week, Lewis?
Yeah.
We had that clip of the CDC guy basically saying, well, we don't know.
He said we don't know how to remove vinyl chloride and some of these other chemicals from your body, but we can treat your cancer later. I'm paraphrasing a bit. But my jaw dropped when I heard that, and I can't even imagine what you all thought when you heard that. And it's a terrible thing, but to me, and I'm curious your thoughts, maybe Ashley, if you want to give your thoughts on this, I heard that and I was like, it's shocking, but it might be the most truthful thing that unfortunately you all heard at that CDC meeting.
It's wild too, because with what Jordan said, there are a lot more people than what reached out to Jordan. They're worried about their reputation. They're worried about, my family's not happy that I went and did what I did, but it was necessary because other people are suffering. So it's really important. And our group, Unity Council, just received an email, which Jamie does have, and I feel like she'd like to mention a little more on it. It was a group of well-known, prestigious people that came together and really analyzed the situation like asked, and they basically said, we're at Chernobyl. We shouldn't be there. And that's what everyone's been saying from the beginning on here. We as residents have enough common sense. Some people are experiencing it, some people aren't. Maybe some people are just getting tolerant now. But it's going to be to the point of no return when those people actually realize. And even if they don't like me now for going and doing what I did, I'm doing it out of the kindness of my heart because I don't want to have to hear them suffering later. That's not a situation I want to tell someone I told you so, because it shouldn't come to that. We shouldn't even have to have this situation to begin with.
And on the scale of disruptions, I'd say having your life, your family, your body, your health, you're permanently forever damaged, that's a little more disruptive than disrupting their fucking, little meeting where they do the bidding of special interests. I digress. Jamie, could you say a little bit more about this group of people that have basically called this Chernobyl and that folks shouldn't be there?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say something else real quick. Sorry. About Unity Council. When we were talking about differences and how you said, Jordan, sometimes people are fighting, what I realized is that we all want the same thing at the core. We want answers. So if we can agree to that, then we can all work together in the ways that we work. Each one of us are needed in that group to represent a different part of opinions in the community. And I also feel like this is going to be beneficial to all those people that choose to stay in East Palestine, as well as those that choose to get out. I just feel like everyone should make an informed decision. Maybe the very raw truth is everything's fine except for the creeks. So stay there, keep your kids out of the creeks. But we all deserve to know the extent of the damage and the true answers to what's going on in our homes and in our environment. But back to the letter. I'm sorry. So a community member actually sent me a letter that he received back in early March. And it was from a nonprofit in Connecticut of a lot of very well established toxicologists, environmental attorneys. And when you read their credentials, each one of them's a paragraph. They were consultants to governors. They were, received awards for, their work with public health in regards to chemicals and all these really established people. And what the letter said was, it started out by saying that we spoke to Dr. Chung from the CDC, who was the gentleman that came in last week. He has told us that we could give our opinion. So here's the opinion of the board. What it says in there is that we know from experience that sometimes it takes a minute before you get the symptoms of chemical exposure. But we need to err on the side of caution. We need to get people out now before they have been exposed long term. It said that, especially in this case, because we know what the chemical was, it was vinyl chloride. So we should not be in that environment. They needed to get us out of there immediately. The second part of that, it talks about comparing the relocation zone to Chernobyl, and how if you went out as far as you would need to get people out of these toxins until at least the environment can be tested, that it would be mass economic hardship. So this letter was sent. It was, stamped of approval from the CDC. And the letter itself is dated March 4th. Or I'm sorry, I apologize. It's dated February 8th. But the email that I received that was forwarded to me, the actual email was dated March 8th. And all the subsequent emails were from March 8th. So I think that was just a typo. I did speak with the woman who wrote the letter this morning. She gave me a homework assignment to do, and I'm going to work on that, and we're going to try to get it into the right hands. But, I guess I kind of knew all along that the CDC knew. There was no not knowing. Their own employees came in and got sick, and then they dipped out until we forced them back in by using our voices. But to see that in writing, that they knew that we needed out of there as early as March 8th, which they knew that night. That's being, again, be honest. But, to see that in writing, like, I don't know, it just kind of hit me like, wow, how can you do that to human beings, to children, to the elderly? Like, it just baffles me that you can have such lack of compassion for human life.
Yeah, and I mean,
if I can jump in here.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to jump in about the health impact. So this is something that, we've been talking about: respiratory illness, intestinal illness, nosebleeds, and, now starting to see those neurological symptoms, the tremors and the seizures. But I actually got a call today about an hour before I came on with you guys, from a good friend that lives in Enon Valley. Her house, by the way the crow flies, she's about 3 miles. They were in the emergency room all night last night. Massive rectal bleeding, enough to potentially need a blood transfusion. 47-year-old male, no other pain, no other symptoms, generally healthy individual, experiencing this just kind of randomly out of the blue. Whether or not it's related to the train derailment, it could be something that we continue to see. And, we know that the testing that's being done by the EPA remains inefficient because we keep seeing things like this, right? We keep getting sick. But I think the truth of the matter here with the EPA is that they don't really have any authority to deal with these individual health concerns, right? So we're really relying on the CDC. We've got kids testing positive for vinyl chloride. But the problem here is that, even if you get a physician's order to get your vinyl chloride tested, the labs in this area are no longer following through with those tests. So it's impossible to know whether these symptoms that we're experiencing are a result of the chemicals or a stress, whatever it is. It's still a result of the train derailment, whether it's your physical manifestation from stress or from the actual chemical. It's still from the derailment. So either way you want to say it. But ultimately, what we desperately need right now is a fully trained medical physician to come to East Palestine and say, you know what, we're going to provide blood work, urine samples, and we're going to do this from assistance from the federal government, which is the whole emergency declaration thing, right? And we need to be having this done and repeated as often as necessary. But those are the types of phone calls that I know Jamie gets them, Ashley gets them, I know Z gets them. And you know what? I will agree with Jamie on one other thing, is that I will never in the history of my life ever thank Norfolk Southern for the shit that they have put us through as a result of this derailment, whether or not it's from the chemicals or the stress. My life has been completely turned upside down, and there is no gratitude there.
What did you say he went to the ER for?
Rectal bleeding, which is
massive.
That was tested
Massive
with one of the chemicals.
bleeding.
There was a lab.
I still can't hear you, Ashley. You're out.
I don't know the exact name
when we put
of the chemical, because there's so many, and I've dived into these.
When we put out the symptom tracker for the Unity Council, we saw a lot of anal bleeding on there. And that's why when a mother had posted, like, my 9-year-old is bleeding from places no 9-year-old should bleed from on Facebook, I assumed it was anal bleeding, because that's what had been reported from the adults. But she actually reached out to me and said that there was blood coming out of his penis. The other issue, when Jessica talks about people reaching out to us, I cannot even explain the number of people that have reached out to me that are first responders, that work at the schools, or just community members that are afraid to say that they are sick or afraid to say how they feel. Whether it's because they're afraid that, if they're a teacher, they can't just take their tenure and leave. They can be blackballed by the school board not to get tenure. And because of the way that people in the community are looking at those of us that are sick and the things that they're saying, these people don't want their reputations in town. East Palestine's a very small town. Your reputation is kind of all you have to get what you need in town. I was a drunken bar fighter when I was 19, and that's still my reputation in East Palestine. So the fact that these firefighters are in fear to speak out, that these educators are afraid to speak out. I just had a message from a girl last night that said, look, I haven't said anything because I'm very shy. Actually, I want to talk to you guys about possibly interviewing her, because I said, you can do this. Like, you have to do this. This is a fight for our children. Like, we can't care about what we look like on television. Have you seen me in some of my interviews? I interviewed in the same clothes for a week because that's all I took with me when I evacuated. I don't care what anybody says about me. I don't care what they say about my looks. I am a mother, and I like I keep saying, people always say, I would fight to my death for my child. Well, back those words up with your ass. Do it.
I want to say one thing on, both of you kind of talked about the testing a little bit. You're asking for, somebody with the medical expertise to be able to come in, to be able to do these blood tests, urine tests. What blows my mind is that if I would have thought back in February on my first trip there, when the governor came into town and opened the lovely clinic that you all had that did so much for everybody in the beginning, the opportunity was there to actually go. You set up the clinic. That is a good first step. The first misstep, though, was what we called out right when it happened, was you're not offering any kind of testing. We can go back and look at the tapes. We were saying that because the experts we were talking to, even at that time, were saying now is the time to just blank, even if you don't know exactly what to test for, start testing people, start collecting blood, start collecting urine samples. You knew it was vinyl chloride. At that point, medical experts would have known that this vinyl chloride metabolite urine test would exist. That test is it perfect? No. But if you were to be testing 1,000 residents once a week for that entire period of time, think about the treasure trove of information we would have. Think about all of the information that would now be available to have more of these answers that you all are looking for, rightfully so. If you would have asked me at that point that we'd be sitting here June 15th saying that testing still isn't available from the state of Ohio, basically isn't really, making it easy for you. The federal government's not making it easy for you. Folks are having to fight tooth and nail to just get basic medical tests done. It drives me a little insane. I'm sure it drives you more insane than it drives me, but it seems like a basic thing that's being missed. And for you to be still needing to demand these same things, and for folks at the State House to have the gall to be like, oh, these people are in here disrupting. They could have scheduled a meeting. The time to schedule a meeting was back in February. They didn't listen to you back in February. So now you're needing to escalate this to another level.
Well, and honestly, I have scheduled meetings. I have talked to Sherrod Brown, and I've been in Washington, D.C., and I was in the Senate room, and I talked to several senators after that. I met with people. Mm-hmm. I have spoken with people on the phone. I've talked to the EPA. I have a meeting, multiple meetings with Mark Durno, who's the regional command, for this area right now. And you know what? Nothing has ever come of it. I've talked to Dr. Tong about what's going on. I did that the first couple weeks. And, this was really the next natural step, was to go to Columbus. And unfortunately, we had to make a stink. And right. In order to listen. And, I do want to shift gears a little bit, only because I do have to hop off here in like 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to say, the other demand, while the health concerns are extremely important, and I do think that they are priority, the municipal water filter, whoever they is, they provide funding for municipal water filter, and that's being installed in East Palestine. But many of us actually have private wells in the area. And, I really think that funding should be extended to provide the proper filtration in order for us, those of us with private well systems. We know that the spread of the chemicals through Leslie and Sulphur Run Creeks, they went 7 to 8 miles, but really we're talking about the plume radius at this point. Those plume maps have come out. Anybody with a private well or municipal water in those areas, those could be impacted. So we desperately need filtration. I mean, water, air, soil, those are I like to think as humans we are entitled to those things. I know we're not, but essentially that's what we need to survive. The Clean Water Act actually requires permits for the discharge pollutants, right? So they discharge all these pollutants into the streams. The US EPA, the Ohio EPA, these are the parties that are responsible for supplying those permits. I have asked time and time again, multiple people that I know have asked time and time again to release the permits for the stormwater pollution prevention plan, and that's under the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. These permits have yet to be provided. This is a serious problem. They have no idea where these pollutants are going. They have no idea how they're getting cleaned up. And, spraying the streets from all the dust and stuff and putting those socks in the way, like, that's your plan? Okay, well, let me see it in writing. Like, they are required to provide these permits. And we, again, to my knowledge, I have yet to see any of them. So I think I'm going to, again, leave you with this. And this is what I've done in New York, Washington, D.C., anywhere that I've been an advocate is, if you live near an active train track or a creek or a stream, this could happen to you, just like it happened in the community of East Palestine and surrounding areas. Thank
you so much, Jess. I hope we could talk again.
Yeah, thanks so much. Take care. Appreciate you having me on.
If you guys will just allow me, I want to go back to something because I think it's really important. And I know that there are some first responders who are either watching now or will be sent these videos. Just to kind of totally drop the curtain here, Lewis and I have been trying to get a hold of first responders. We've been successful, maybe a few, but not enough. You know, I could only tell you my experience. In the case of Flint, which obviously they didn't have a visual explosion that put it on the map right away. It took 18 months for national media to finally cover that they were poisoned. But in the case of Flint, there was one story in particular that I found out that the governor's top advisor was going around Flint, basically trying to pay off the sickest residents who were extremely loud, getting media headlines, popping off at town halls, and basically becoming a problem because they were exposing that the governor wasn't doing shit for them. And they were exposing that we're a lot more fucked up than the media is reporting. And there was one resident in particular, I won't get into names, who had the evidence that I needed, had audio of offers that were made, documents, and for a lot of reasons, that person just didn't want to go public. And I worked on this person. I'm telling you, I must have talked to this resident at least 20 hours on the phone in over a year. And just, I turned into this resident's therapist / journalist. I'm not saying this for myself. I'm telling you, I know that residents, for a variety of reasons, whether you're first responders or just residents, there's a lot of fears and threats to not go public when you know potentially scandalous information. And I believe that the first responders know scandalous information. And I believe the first responders know and could tell us things, even if we don't use your name, that would show that what Norfolk Southern is saying, what the EPA is saying, are lies. And I believe if they would come public, just talking to us, and we could expose that this is beyond just a human scandal, but a scandal of they should have never blown up these cars in the first place, you have a chance to get all of the media to cover this like it should be covered. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is, after begging this guy for over a year to go on the record, finally he went on the record, gave me what I needed, and criminal charges were filed based on that story against the governor's top advisor. Now, that's not going to make everybody healthy in Flint, but at least there was some accountability because I had proof that the governor's top advisor was going around basically trying to extort, among other things. So my point is, I don't live in East Palestine, and I'm not trying to minimize your fears if you're a first responder or a resident who has information. I understand that reputations matter and all these things matter, and maybe some of you don't want to lose your roles at the fire department or whatever. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what your reputation is if you get cancer in a few years. It doesn't really matter if you have a job at the firehouse if your whole fucking town is going to be the worst cancer alley in America. And I'm not trying to condescend, but you ever hear the phrase, you're either on the right side of history or on the wrong side of history. And if you have information that could help journalists or your neighbors, please consider, and you could do it in a way that you don't have to put your name to it. Some of the best journalists in the world have managed to report things protecting their sources. But sometimes you just got to go on that upside down roller coaster and just close your eyes. So that's, I'm not trying to condescend or be on my moral high horse, but it's more important to protect. You don't want any more children peeing out blood. You don't want any more people bleeding out of their butt. And you want the truth exposed, because I got news for you. If the truth is exposed in 3 years, nothing's going to happen. The longer these stories go on, nothing will happen. Go ask the people of Flint. The quicker and the sooner you get this out, while this is still relatively a new crisis, I don't want to say the better things are. You're all going to be, unfortunately, sick. But at least you could get the relief you need, which are federal resources. I believe it was Jess. You need Medicare for all and expanded health care. You need full payment of your homes if you want to move, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you for allowing me to go on my high horse about that.
Can I go on a high horse about that real quick too?
Sure.
Add something to that. I do think now is the time. Now is the time for these people to start speaking. We've waited long enough. You see the health effects on your other community members. First of all, to our educators that are afraid, you've devoted your whole life to children for a reason. Now is when the children need you. The same way with our first responders. You've devoted your whole life to protecting the community for a reason. And this goes so much further than just the firefighters in our area. Firefighters across the country are exposed to these things every day. Not just firefighters, all first responders. And it's due to the negligence of Norfolk Southern. If I kept starting my car on fire every day, yeah, the or the fire department would respond, but after a while they'd get tired of coming to my house to extinguish my car. They should be tired of going in and cleaning up these messes and exposing their first responders to all of these carcinogens just so Norfolk Southern can make a buck. So now is the time. All you people that are afraid of your reputations, stand up behind us and let the world see how many of us there are. Because if you don't do it now, we may never have another chance to do it.
I want to go off the back of what Jamie just said. I've had so many people retired that I've spoken with. People from the EPA, people that have done hazmat, people that have worked for the railroad, people that had real official spots. I've had teachers, a lot of different people contact me and still keep in contact with me because they feel bad. They have remorse for doing what they did. And they wish they could have done something because not only are the people around them, their health was affected by it, but their own health was affected by it too. So now they're sitting by themselves with nothing else but their own thoughts to think about. They should have did something sooner. They don't have that ability to do the things they could have done with their family, their kids, enjoyed the rest of that time because they're in the now. But that now is going to creep up on them. They're going to live in that now forever if they don't say something.
I want to get back to your question real quick, Jordan. I'm sorry. Jessica got us off question. You guys were talking about the CDC clinics and the first ones that were put in and how they could have been used. And, I think that's where the mistrust of the CDC started because they had it all over TV, creating this dog and pony show. We're bringing in these clinics. The clinics were just looking at you, literally. They weren't doing any type of testing. They weren't taking your vitals, nothing. So, now the issue is no one wants to go to this clinic because they don't trust it. And unless people go to that clinic, we're not going to have the data. The government's not going to have the data they need. But Linda Murphy said it best when you were talking about, they said we can treat the cancer.
Right.
Just kind of wait. She said, look, if we're lab rats and that's what we are at this point, then you need to do this right. Mm-hmm. You've already poisoned us, but at least use what you've done to us for some good to save other people. Had they started that testing back when they brought in those CDC clinics, they would have a lot better grasp. Like you said, if they would have been testing us for vinyl chloride the whole way along this path, this journey of 4.5 months already, at least if you're killing us, kill us for a reason.
Right, because unfortunately the concern, and at that meeting, Linda did do a great job of bringing this up. For those of you who are wondering, Linda Murphy's another East Palestine resident. We went through a lot of these clips last week, and at this meeting with CDC officials, Linda spoke up quite a bit to really, press on some of these questions that need to continue to be pressed on here. But yeah, the treasure trove of information that would exist had these tests been done at that point would be it'd be a whole different ballgame. And instead now, she's saying like, okay, we're going through all this right now, and no one's been doing the appropriate testing. No one's been doing it. Like, we're not even going to potentially even be able to learn anything from this, so that, God forbid, the next time something like this happens, there is still no playbook, basically, because of how bungled this has been by the EPA, by the CDC, by the state government. I mean, the list goes on of all the people who have messed up as far as the response goes here. And not only have they messed up, but they've basically messed up so bad that you don't even really know how to correct it for next time because they haven't actually done the testing along the way to be able to do it.
And Colin,
No, sorry.
Colin, can we show the not the mayor, the governor's letter, I guess, to FEMA? Because he has now asked for, I guess, a second or third time and needing an extension. I don't know. Can you zoom in a little bit? It's kind of hard to read. So this is him reaching out to FEMA on March 7th, recently. I think this is in the last few days. On March 7th, under the previous provisions of 44 CFR, you granted the state of Ohio a 120-day extension to request a major disaster declaration for damage occurring as a result of the train derailment in East Palestine. The extension was granted to allow time to properly assess the impacts of the derailment. At this time, there has been a full resolution of the issues impacting East Palestine. Therefore, I hereby request an additional, there has not been a full resolution. Therefore, I hereby request an additional 120-day extension to submit a request for major disaster declaration for the state of Ohio due to the train derailment. I don't need to read the rest. What the fuck is this governor doing, folks? Like, I don't care if you're a Republican, a Democrat, it doesn't really matter. What do you need to declare? First of all, and I'm hoping Melissa could come on, but under the law, it's not eligible for disaster. I think it should be, but the law says the disaster declarations can only be for natural disasters like hurricanes,
but then why
tornadoes.
Are they extending it?
I have no idea. But I don't know. What does he need? What exactly is the governor's top priority other than this, that he needs more extensions? That's why I cannot, I don't know, DeWine, in the Republican Party of today, he seems like I guess one of the normal ones, but he's also no different than the rest of them in taking a lot of money from these companies, including Norfolk Southern. It seems from the beginning, he was giving the keys to Norfolk Southern to deal with this, which is essentially giving the rapist, access to your rape kit. So I have to ask you, I mean, what on God's earth, what more information does he need, or what is he gathering to provide to FEMA to make the case? You have sick residents, you have people testing high vinyl chloride levels, you have testing that has been done by independent sources, which the EPA seemed interested in, showing much higher dioxin levels. I don't know what exactly is these extensions, and also what is the reason he's not declaring a state of emergency. Right now, the governor of Michigan will not comment. It's now been 42 days about a paper mill that's releasing toxic levels of hydrogen sulfide into a poor black community. Doesn't the governor owe the residents of East Palestine an explanation why he has not declared a state of emergency?
He does owe us an explanation, and I think we all know what it is. All their pockets are lined by the railroad, and I think what East Palestine has done is it has magnified a lot of things that have been going on in our country for years, from deregulation of the railroad to how these chemicals are passed through our communities. It's magnified the EPA and their cover-ups. It's magnified that our politicians' pockets are lined by these big corporations. It's magnified that media is used to control the narrative of things that have happened. After the people came in, all the media came in for the big combustion, the big show, and then half of them don't even they don't care about what's going on in East Palestine. It's not a big enough story. Like, it is just magnified all these issues that have been around for years. And something that I guess I knew, but reflecting back yesterday, Ashley and I were driving down to Columbus, and I was thinking about what to say in my speech. And I was going through my phone, and I found the video from when the toxicologist was originally at my house on February 14th. And I'm asking, what about soil testing? And he tells me the soil testing hasn't been done. And I'm asking him about the creek, and he says, well, we've tested it, but the results aren't back yet. So I don't have the results, and you don't have the results. When I said, look at these, at that time, it was a clear bubble of oil on top of the creeks, and it would hit the rocks and then split and then come back together. When I asked him what that was in the creek, well, if I had to guess, I'd say it's a butyl acrylate. So you don't even know. And I'm saying in there, we haven't seen the manifest, and they just came out with 3 new chemicals yesterday. And the only testing that they were doing before we walked back into those homes was the air testing. Lewis, tell them about the air testing.
Yeah. Which the air testing was what we essentially debunked pretty early on, and even the EPA's official Mark Durno admitted that the devices being used, the PIDs that are used, it's essentially a handheld air detector, would only pick up levels of butyl acrylate when it was 5 times above the level of concern. Which is obviously 5 times way too many. That means if you're in that home, that meter isn't going to pick it up until it's 5 times over the level, leaving a lot of risk right there. And not to mention as well that according to several experts that we've spoken with, those detectors also would never pick up phosgene, which is a chemical byproduct of combusted vinyl chloride. It also would not pick up formaldehyde, which is another chemical byproduct of vinyl chloride, unless it has a special attachment on it. But if you put that special attachment on it, you cannot test for any of the other chemicals. To date, I have not seen a residential air test I know that they're not doing residential air tests for formaldehyde. So we know that they weren't testing for that. Hydrogen chloride is another one that those detectors have issues with, especially when there is a mixture of chemicals like there very much was in this case. So yeah, I mean, it's all sorts of issues with all of this coming together, and then now just recently they've released the plume map. We haven't actually talked a lot about this. I recently sent the plume map to a source that I have. This source is very well versed in like soot deposition. Literally, some of their PhD work was in working specifically on stuff like this. I have reached out to the EPA with a couple very specific questions on this. I want to read a couple things that he said to me in an email this morning. First off,
I don't want to cut you off, but
yeah.
Some people might not know what you're talking about. We're talking about the plume of the explosion and where all the chemicals went in terms of the wind and all that. So, go ahead.
But
right.
I add something real quick.
Yeah.
But let's just note that the plume map that the EPA put out was for a 10-hour span.
Yes.
The thing has been on fire for days. But I'm sorry, Lewis.
No, you're good. And that is one of the big issues, is that they literally only, this is for a 10-hour window, which is problem number one, because even first off, when the train was set on fire, it was, that was over an entire weekend. And then they did the controlled, I just said controlled burn. I shouldn't say. Then they did the open burn explosion, which then lasted for even more time. So, Colin, you can pull that graphic back up here. So this is, showing where the plume was. East Palestine is kind of right in the center there. You can see the text is just to the left of the kind of darker area on the right there. The wind shifted directions a couple times that night. That's why you see some of the deposited soot on the kind of lower right, and then another bit up to the north. That was because of changing wind directions, which obviously doesn't seem like a great time to set something on fire when the wind is going to blow it in multiple areas instead of just one, but that's just my thought. A couple points that the source that I've been speaking with said, who again is very well versed in this sort of thing, he had a couple thoughts. First, he said, I find it hard to believe that the reconstruction of particle concentration is only 0.1 milligrams over meters squared. While that is not low, it is more than 10 times lower than, let's say, a bar with smokers. Just looking at photos of the disaster, the sky is visibly more smoky than a bar. EPA needs to share their methodology for reconstruction of particle matter concentrations. Essentially, he's saying, okay, it is showing that the levels are a little higher than normal, but not as high as literally outside of a bar where people are smoking cigarettes, barbecuing, stuff like that. Another major point that he points out here is that on this document, and Colin, I believe on that document, it's going to show a chart with some readings. The only thing that they're using to test for, as far as how dangerous the soot that was deposited was exclusively for dioxin and furans. We've reported extensively on dozens of other chemical byproducts that would have come from this. In speaking with this source quite a bit now, dioxins, while they are very dangerous in small quantities, dioxin is not the primary thing that's created in that explosion. Dioxin, volume-wise, would be much smaller. The larger things you would find things you'd find in larger quantities would be the formaldehydes, it would be the hydrogen chlorides, it would be phosgene. The fact that we're not seeing how much of those chemicals were found in any of this soot, or any sort of like, I'm speaking in a little bit non-scientific terms now, but like residues of any of these sorts of things, or signs that phosgene, formaldehyde, hydrogen chloride, any of these things, why they're not testing for that, they're only testing for dioxins, is a big question that I have. And especially when you look back and you see, okay, in February, Jamie, I mean, I was at the town hall meeting that you all put on when you were working with River Valley Organizing. At the time, the EPA didn't want to touch dioxins. They thought, you're ridiculous to even look for dioxin. And now, when it comes to this plume map, that's all they're focused on now. That's it. They don't want to look at anything else. They're only focused on dioxin on the plume map. So I have reached out to the EPA earlier today. I have not received a response yet. But a lot of questions that I have about this plume map so far. I'm curious what your all thoughts are on it. Jamie, I believe your audio is...
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So again, when I was riding to Columbus yesterday with Ashley, I actually got a call back from Mark Durno because the less scientific and the more layman's questions I had just at first glance were, one, why is it only for 10 hours when this thing burned for days? And two, why did you cut off the top of the map? It doesn't even show you how far it reached north. Not being a scientist, those were my questions. And he kind of said, well, those are good questions, but since we don't actually know how much of the chemicals were leaking at the time, we're doing this plume map after the fact. We all know why we're doing it after the fact, because the EPA did a plume map to explode one tanker of vinyl chloride. They were told the night before that it was moving to 5 tankers, and no plume map was ever created for this explosion. So when you talk about the wind shifting, nobody even looked at it. They looked at it for one tanker.
And something you just said goes to this clip right here. Durno, who, by the way, is basically the EPO's cleanup man. Go ask the people of Flint how much integrity Mark Durno has. I digress. But what he's saying, well, we don't really know how much chemicals were burning. Take a listen.
This is a very unique situation because we went from the talking about venting and burning one car that probably had about 50% contents in it to venting and burning all 5 cars within a very short period of time, in a very time compressed and a very, non-discretionary time environment where we were forced into that kind of backed into that tactic, I should say. And I'm not saying that is not the tactic of choice, but they were not able to articulate any other courses of action that were thought through at that point in time. And we were trying to understand like what changed overnight that was driving that tactic that morning when they were briefing Governor DeWine.
So that is the head of Pennsylvania's FEMA in a hearing in March, February, basically diplomatically saying, they pushed back on Norfolk Southern when Norfolk Southern said, we're going to blow up another 4 cars of vinyl chloride because Norfolk Southern could not or would not provide any other alternatives that they looked into, because clearly they didn't look into any other alternatives. And they were wondering, well, what changed overnight? Because on Sunday night, we were talking about maybe doing 1 car. And by morning, we got to blow up 5 cars, or all of these are going to explode. I also want to play this. This is from Beaver County, Pennsylvania Commissioner Jack Manning, who worked in I don't know exactly what he did, but he worked in the chemical industry for 30 years, so he knows what he's talking about.
Clearly, when you're in a command situation of those, I've been that as a plant manager or director of manufacturing, you talk to the experts and you have options. I don't know what other options were presented, but it seems clear to me they took the most expedient option to get trains running again. That implosion and building back the tracks and getting trains, to me it's unconscionable. I can't believe I agree. If I was a director of manufacturing, there's no way I'm going to have trains running through a contaminated site that quickly without remediation and those things. So they need to be held accountable, they need to clean it up, and they need to compensate the business disruption. Got a call from the people that provide our weekly farm box.
So you got two officials from Pennsylvania, including the head of FEMA for Pennsylvania, saying Norfolk Southern basically didn't look into any other safer options and just blew this shit up to, I mean, the first one didn't say this, but I think that's what he's trying to say. The second one just said it. They just wanted to open up the trains. And I think that goes to Mark Durno is acknowledging we don't really know what the chemicals were that, or how much of the chemicals were burning. It's just crazy. And another thing is, if the CDC official, after lying, by the way, because he said the CDC did not issue guidelines that doctors shouldn't test for vinyl chloride, they absolutely did. Then he said, well, it was more of a fact sheet. Okay.
Right. The word mincing there was ridiculous. No, we didn't issue guidance. We issued a fact sheet.
But if he's acknowledging you're going to get cancer, sorry, that a lot of residents are going to get cancer, well, what are they getting cancers from if the testing is showing there's no contamination? Those two things don't make sense. All the testing that they're citing is saying all the levels are meeting, whatever their recommended, their allowable limits are. But then he's saying, well, we can't extract it from your body, but we'll treat your cancer. It just seems like, at least on the Pennsylvania side of things, it seems like the officials were more transparent and honest from the beginning. Not so much on your side.
Well, why'd they put in the health clinic if there's nothing wrong with us, if these chemicals aren't causing any types of health illnesses? I mean, exactly what that gentleman just said. They did it the fastest way to get those trains back up and running through our town. They were waiting to go through town. They were back in town before most residents. And what I just said, they told us to go back in our homes with no air, no soil, no water testing, and not even know what chemicals were in the creeks.
Go ahead, Ashley. Oh.
It's the internet service out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Your connection was good when you were outside.
I had to go room to room. Mine's not working either.
Okay.
It was good when you were outside, Ashley.
Yeah. We could hear you though if you want to talk audio. Okay. There's one more clip I wanted to show too. Get your reaction.
Wait, are you waiting for me? Because we just went through.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's so delayed on my end. We have some EPA agents here too and cleanup people, so they're using a lot of the internet. So I have to go to this room, then go outside. Then I have people outside that are coming in that are trying to listen to me and trying to talk to me about yesterday. But what I was going to say is, does anyone really know about the valve that failed? Did it actually fail? Do we have video of the failure going on? Because it seems like just another step to hurry this along. Because when I ran in to feed my animals the day that the army and everything was there, I was still saying psh, 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 and hearing explosions. I have a picture from my attic window trying to look over to it, and I was still hearing them. So I don't believe that there was an actual failure if just one tank was failed. So is this just something to push along more and more problems and more cover-ups that is going to be a huge issue? Because just hearing and seeing all this and where the map went, I remember clearly hearing these pops because I thought it was going to explode again. And it put terror into me when I had to hurry up and run in to feed this animal.
And to be clear, you're talking about the pressure relief valves on the vinyl chloride cars?
Yes. And it was only one. Right? There was
That's why we have a lot of questions that we'd love to talk to some first responders about of why was Norfolk Southern in command in the beginning of this fire instead of the fire department? That's number one, because Norfolk Southern was calling the shots. Two, why did Norfolk Southern send first responders away about 3.5 hours after this fire started when it was contained? When I say contained, I don't mean out, but it was not getting any worse. which first responders I've spoken with said that's when you go at it harder, when you've contained it. But Norfolk Southern sent first responders away. No first responder I spoke with, either that was there or former first responders that were not involved with this particular fire, none of them could explain that it just doesn't make sense to do that unless you want the fire to get worse. I want to play this last clip because this is a Pennsylvania official basically acknowledge that this was not controlled in any way.
I would just say that from the initial train derailment, and we knew that there was 5 cars of vinyl chloride involved, that was what we started the modeling on. So we were always looking at the possibility of 5 vinyl chloride cars, either as the term is called, controlled burn, which isn't, they don't burn under control, it's we control when they burn. That's the only control we have. Whether they would do it on themselves or when we choose to do it. So all the modeling was based on 5 cars. And
so he's saying it's the only control is when we detonate. They don't detonate in any controlled manner. So you got Mark Durno saying we don't know the percentage of the chemicals that went into the air. You have the EPA saying, oh, our equipment that we use to test isn't really good to test the low-level contamination, which can still be hazardous. You got this Pennsylvania official, I forget what his title is, saying, yeah, no, this wasn't controlled. So I think what Ashley's getting at, I think we got a cover up here, folks, as Aaron Brockovich has said over and over again.
I should have got a lot more mad. I should have got a lot more mad at the State House, but I was too worried I'd get arrested because I wanted to be peaceful and I wanted to make a point. And yes, we had to yell. We had to project our voices over all of the other people in that place. But honestly, if you look at it, I swear on everything I have left, there were bangs going off in a spaced out time the day I went into my home when the National Guard waved me in and said, what are you doing here? I have to feed my animal. He allowed me to go in.
And I have Mark Durno on a phone call admitting that was not a controlled burn. That was after your story was put out. And the interesting thing when you're saying why was Norfolk Southern in control, something that a first responder had told me was, I first heard it from the first responder that the fire chief was out of town the night of the derailment. So after the kind of nasty text messages came out about me that the mayor and fire chief sent, the mayor called me, and that's one of the things I said, why didn't anybody know that the chief wasn't in town? Not that he can't go on vacation, but when you're asking all these questions, on the floor of the House about who was in command and who was in control, and those were the very early hours, why would you not say the chief was out of town? Everybody knew that. That was common knowledge. I said, no, it wasn't. The very next day, the fire chief did an interview up in Youngstown News and said, I was out of town the night of the fire. No one had ever said that. And it's just kind of funny that he brought it out the day after this conversation that I had, confronting the mayor as to what a first responder told me. And the funny part is, it was when we were doing our community press conference. And I have a first responder that's a friend, and I sent it out and said, just to let you know, first responders are invited to come to the press conference and speak if they're sick, because you guys got screwed worse than anybody did. And the person said, I will be there. And, my spouse will also be there. We are both first responders and are both sick. So I sent a short clip of a interview that Chief Dravik did where he said no firefighters were sick. And the immediate response from this person was, yeah, because he wasn't effing there. He wasn't even there that night. So that just raw emotion of this person who's a first responder, exploding. And it's like, if there is some kind of bro code within the fire department, surely Chief Dravik has broken that by leaving his brothers and sisters behind, by not talking about firefighters from other departments that have had to have multiple eye surgeries that are still sick, for not sticking up for these neighboring departments that didn't get the same amount of money and assistance to replace their equipment as he did. You know, for doing videos, promotional videos for Norfolk Southern. Like, that has to be a slap in the face to all these firefighters that are now faced with the same cancer that Ashley and I are faced with. It doesn't make sense to me.
I gotta go do daddy duty. Lewis is gonna keep this going. I put the number to Governor DeWine. Just phone bomb that motherfucker tomorrow. Even if you have to get some low level intern, but make them know, status coup. Whether you live in East Palestine, Ohio, another country, because we have international people watching, trust me, sometimes politicians do the right thing out of being annoyed. So please call the governor, call his team, and we're going to stay on this as Lewis and I are talking about our next trip there. But you could take it from here, Lewis.
For sure. Thanks, Jordan.
Can we use that number for a drunk dial too, Lewis?
Yeah. Give him a call. Anything you need, you give give the governor a call there.
Teach my nieces how
someone
to prank
picks you up
call.
at a bar. Here's my number.
Yeah.
That's
Although
the number you give whenever you get picked up.
I wouldn't expect to hear any truth coming from that phone call, though, because as we know, Governor DeWine has done his fair share of lying throughout this as well. Some of it directly to my face. If we remember back to the early days back in February when this was going on. There's kind of one last element of this that I'd like to get your take on, if that's okay. Colin, do we have the article about the weekend rail safety bill, the article with J.D. Vance that we could pull up, please? I'll start reading a little bit of it here. So the headline, J.D. Vance has weakened his rail safety bill at lobbyists' request at this point. For nearly a decade, lawmakers and railroad regulators have been trying to get puncture-susceptible tank cars designed in the 1960s for non-hazardous shipments off the nation's tracks. In the wake of the catastrophic derailment and chemical release in East Palestine, Ohio in February, bipartisan rail safety legislation committed to quickly end hazardous material shipments in the antiquated tank cars, which regulators said had failed at higher rates during the Ohio derailment than updated fortified tank cars on the same train. Quote, the Railway Safety Act would require the adoption of safer tank cars that carry hazardous materials by 2025 instead of 2029, something we've called on Congress to get done, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg tweeted when the bill was introduced. Not that Pete Buttigieg has done anything or will do anything in the future, sidebar there. But last month, the bill's co-sponsor, Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance, quietly amended his own legislation to delay the tank car change by years at the request of the chemical industry and lobbyists. I won't go through this whole article here, but I'll be honest that in the beginning of this, it really did seem like Senator Vance, while I might disagree on some of his politics, was really trying to push forward some of this stuff. Not saying that I was surprised to see it, because a politician's going to do what a politician's going to do, but I mean, how does it feel at this point that okay, some of the safety changes might still be coming, but that they're delaying them for really no reason other than, from this reporting, that's the chemical industry asked him, and again, politician's gonna politician. Just curious your thoughts.
I want to quote my
Why isn't it done now?
Yeah, that's quote my stepdad, actually.
Oh, I think she'll be there. We go. I can't hear you yet.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Listen, I'm so sorry.
You're good.
So I want to quote my stepdad from when he disrupted yesterday in the middle of the hearing. We went to the State House. He said, when are you politicians going to start working for the people of Ohio that voted you instead of the crooked ass railroad?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know what?
That's the problem.
I think we have that clip, actually, Colin. It's the second video from the at the top of the live doc, the second protest clip from the second clip from the State House. I think we have that. If not, it's okay.
Do the right thing. Declare an emergency. What if it were your families that were poisoned by Norfolk Southern? We're all gonna get cancer.
Start working for your fellow Ohioans instead of the crooked-ass railroad.
Now watch how these guards handle him. Look, see how he stands and backs up against the wall?
Yeah.
But he wants to manhandle little Jessica Kennard.
Right, which is, I mean, we saw some of that footage at the very beginning there, and for those of you who might be like, oh, he looks familiar, that's Darren Gamble. We've done a couple interviews with him and his wife Stella. Darren, you said is your stepdad, correct? Gotcha. Jamie's got a lot of family in the area, so I want to make sure I've got it all right there. Ashley, I'm curious. I mean, your take on, you know, all you're hoping for again at this point in some cases. Obviously, you want to make sure that the people who are still trying to get out of East Palestine have the ability to be able to do so, to get answers, but a lot of you want to just make sure that something like this doesn't happen to somebody else again soon. One way to do that is through some of these, you know, the railway legislation that is being talked about here. What are your thoughts on these, you know, Senator Vance at this point? I'm sure there are others who are doing the same thing, essentially weakening the bill by request of the industries that are being affected here.
I think with our issue with consuming so much for the railroad and the big companies, like I know P&G uses the railways, Ford uses the railways. Now I know, you know, the trucks were on the trains. I mean, the more we consume and use, and the need for those chemicals, like I know it's going to be hard to not use certain things or change things because we're not in a convenient time. Everything has to be done, ready, go to sleep, wake up, work, get the kids ready. Nothing is convenient anymore. But there's nothing we can do to break away from what they're doing with our lives unless someone can change that path or someone can actually support us. And I understand a pay grade, you know, some more money for, I'll loosen it here, I'll loosen it there. I'm not going to make that guideline so heavy. Well, that really does harm a lot of people because no one knows about our situation unless they watch you guys. People come here at this hotel, they don't know about it. They're like, oh, what happened in East Palestine? The big train that exploded, you know, like this could happen anywhere. But there needs to be a lot stricter things done. There needs to be some kind of different basis or incentive for different types of transportation. Because right now, this is the most evil thing I've ever encountered in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, unless either of you want to add anything else, I want to thank you both so much for taking the time to join us yet again. Nice job yesterday, getting out there, making your voices heard at the State House. You know that we're going to keep reporting on this story. We're going to keep, we'll be out there, like I said, at some point this summer. Jordan and I are working on getting me back out there to East Palestine, probably sometime in July, maybe the beginning of August, to try to keep getting this out there because unfortunately, for those of you watching, as you've heard, this is still a major issue that is affecting folks in East Palestine, but also in the surrounding areas over the state line in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. So, Jamie and Ashley, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Sign our
Liz, for
petition too.
continuing.
Do we have a link for the petition somewhere? Or
we can send it right along to you. After
Jamie,
we went
even if
yesterday,
you
we did have a lot more people signing up.
Yep, Jamie, if you can put it in the chat on the right side, if you click on or you can even text it to me and I'll make sure it gets in here but before we get to the very end because I'm going to go through some super chats and a few other things. So thank you both so much for taking the time. And Jamie, if you send me that link, we'll make sure that we get that for folks to sign.
I'll send it to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Alrighty, so again, that was Jamie Wallace and Ashley McCollum. Earlier on, we also had another resident, Jess. I am missing her last name right now, so I apologize for that. I believe it was Jess.
Kennard.
Kennard, thank you, sir. I mean, clearly still a major problem going on here. Again, if you were to have told me back in February on my first trip to East Palestine that on June 15th, which is actually my mom's birthday, so happy birthday to my mom. I'm sure she's probably not watching right now, and she's hopefully out to dinner somewhere. But if you would have told me back then, June 15th, we would still be talking about getting appropriate testing done, I would have told you that I was crazy. Covering this story has really revealed, to me at least, how incompetent some of these three-letter agencies that are supposed to work for the people, considering our tax dollars pay for them, how poorly the EPA has handled this, how poorly the CDC is handling this, among other agencies, including the state government. It's a crisis. It's terrible that these folks are needing to deal with this again for months, and nothing has really been done as far as providing some sort of justice, for even really providing answers in a lot of cases to this. Colin, I believe Jordan may have just sent that link if you're able to try to get that into here. But in the meantime, I'm going to read through a couple super chats, and then we will have the link for folks who want to sign the petition that Jamie and Ashley have put together. But first, I'm going to go through a couple of these super chats. First off, we've got Caitlin, $2. Every American should be paying attention to EP. Caitlin, I agree wholeheartedly. Again, this story has it's not over. Honestly, a lot of the cover up, we've almost every week, I feel like, kind of dug into a new angle, whether it first started with the air testing being absolutely insufficient, whether it be the EPA lying, calling it a controlled burn when clearly it's not a controlled burn. It was an open burn. They're violating their own guidelines by doing this. And now some of this information that we're digging into as far as the plume data, the plume map goes, I think we're going to have a whole bunch more information coming with that. I'm curious. I've reached out to the EPA literally this morning. Once we get a response from them, I'm going to put together an article there, and we'll have some more information from a source who I've been working with closely, who this is exactly what this person went and what studied during their PhD. So hopefully we'll have some additional answers. But I agree, every American should be paying attention to East Palestine still, because it is hyper relevant to any small town in the U.S. that has train tracks in them. So Caitlin, thanks for the super chat. We appreciate that. Tony D, $5. So much love for all these amazing women in my heart. How are all of their children doing? I worry so much about the children. Tony, thanks so much for the $5. Yeah, I mean, having met both Jamie and Ashley in person, also meeting some of their kids, I know that it's been tough on them as far as being away from town, being in hotel rooms, being moved around. But Jamie and Ashley have been diligent at, actually moving their family outside of town, trying not to bring their families back into town. I know early on that both were having health effects with their kids. To date, so far, I believe their kids have been doing fine since they left town, which is what you want to hear. They are leaving town and they are not getting sick. That also points to the major questions of why are people sick when they're in town still? A couple weeks ago, I don't know if Tony, you probably saw this one, but another resident, Candace DeSanzo, who we've had on the show a couple of times, her young son had to be in town for a couple hours and ended up in the emergency room. He is doing fine now, but these are health issues that are still happening. But Tony, thanks so much for the $5 super chat. We appreciate it. Another super chat here, Fly Chomper Fly, $2. Thanks Status Coup for staying on this. We all need to hear it. No problem, Fly Chomper Fly. We are gonna stay on it. And again, like I said, we're working on getting out there for a 4th reporting trip back to East Palestine later this summer. If you want to try to help continue the type of reporting we've been doing in East Palestine, the reporting Jordan's been doing in Flint and in Kalamazoo, the way to do so is by becoming a member. StatusCoup.com/join is the place to do that. Literally as low as $5 to $10 a month, so that we can continue to go and actually meet folks like Jamie, Ashley, Jess in person and elevate their voices. We are giving the microphone to the people so that you can hear directly from the people who are having these crises happening in their towns. It's better to hear it from them than it is to hear it from some schmuck sitting behind a desk in a studio who never leaves that studio, but claims to have these, amazing takes about how all these problems should be solved. I think if you want to actually learn how to solve these problems, you need to go understand the lived experience of people who are actually living in your country, whether it be in East Palestine or in Jackson, Mississippi. Folks who are working in these studios, for the most part, have no freaking clue what is going on in their own country. So I'd encourage them to actually get out there. So I see we've got another super chat just came in from Chris Garrett. Any news on the air filter baseline evidence? We never really got any additional response from anybody on that yet. We did publish the story on it. It's on the Substack, StatusCoup.com, or StatusCoup.substack.com, where we actually have a furnace filter. A resident had their furnace filter and changed it just days before the derailment, saved it in their basement, and then essentially swapped it out for a new furnace filter. That filter helped provide evidence that, yes, some of these elevated dioxin levels were from the derailment. The unfortunate thing with this filter, we need to try to get more of these, as well as learn a little bit more about the furnace to get exactly like how much of these things were being blown through the resident's home. But what we do know is that there were elevated levels of dioxin and furans in the filter, and that they were highly chlorinated, indicating that they came from the explosion of vinyl chloride in the town. Colin, do we have that link that we can put up on the screen for the petition, or we can put it in the chat potentially, just so that folks can check that out. Awesome. So this is the petition you can sign. Colin looks like he's going to paste that link in the chat right now. If you want to sign the petition to demand Governor DeWine to declare an emergency in East Palestine, I'm sure that the residents of East Palestine, including the ones who were just on today, would really appreciate the support. All that information will be there. But with that, stay tuned. Tomorrow, you're going to have Tina Desiree Berg on. Definitely curious to see what she's got going. We've also, Jordan and Ron and Tina and Kim have been covering all sorts of stories, ranging from Cornel West switching from running from the People's Party to the Green Party. So stay tuned for any new developments on that. Going to be a busy couple weeks as that starts to happen, and we're inching closer to elections, which fun but not fun at the same time. I really just hope that focus does not become lost on some of these important issues like East Palestine. You know that at Status Coup we're going to continue to focus on it, but all too often so many other folks choose not to. But alrighty, with that, thank you all so much. You're not going to see much of me for the next 2 weeks, as I am going to be on a little bit of a trip, but I will be back in the beginning of July. Thank you all so much for watching. Enjoy your weekends, and have a nice night.